Our speaker tonight is Dr. Sarah Sheffield, and her students Haley Vantoorenburg, Taylor Rand, Ohav Harris. Ohav spoke with us before, and Elizabeth Altier. Am I saying that right? Yeah. And Dr. Sarah is going to tell you guys about some career changes for her. I'm sad to say she's going to be leaving USF. I'll let her explain that to you. I will say she's been the most active USF liaison or advisor we've ever had. She's been to more meetings than any other professor we've ever had as a liaison. She's brought students here. I've been very active. We appreciate that. Thank you very much. We're very sorry to see you go, but I know it's a good opportunity for you. So come on up and tell us about that, and then you can introduce your students. We have some checks here for them. You can't buy beer with this. Did y'all sign the beer waiver? Oh, you signed it last time, and you signed it, Haley. But we have some checks here for you. And here's the microphone.
Why are they all made up? My name. I'm joking.
It's a good microphone, I guess.
We found out kind of pretty recently that my husband and I got jobs at Binghamton University in New York, and which is where he is from, and then it turned out to be kind of a dream opportunity for him. So we're going to be leaving for New York in about 72 hours. Yes. That's why I seem so together with it and calm and collected, you know. Joking, obviously. So I want to introduce, I was going to say first off, I want to thank you so much because I really enjoyed getting to develop collaborations and partnerships with you all. I have appreciated it so much. You've been so welcoming to my students who have taken the opportunities you've given them, and they have thrived and done so much with it, and I know that will continue. I know I told Mike that I am more than happy to continue serving as a faculty liaison, and I'll be back and forth for quite a bit to help students finish their degrees. So I'm more than happy to continue working with y'all. It'll be quite an honor. So thank you so much for everything you've done. I really appreciate it. And without further ado, I will introduce my students. So I've got 4 here tonight, and they're all fabulous. So Ohav Harris is going to be speaking first about some of his master's research. And I promised Ohav I wouldn't do this, but he should have known I was lying. But Ohav just won the Richard A. Davis Graduate Student Award for the best graduate student ever at USF. I believe that's the tagline there. Sorry, but I'm not sorry. Not sorry. But he just gave his research at the National Geological Society of America conference. And without further ado, I will introduce, I guess I'll just introduce all of them all at once to make this easier. My next student is Elizabeth Altier, if you want to wave. She is my new master's student. She just moved here from Ithaca, New York. Yeah, and so she will be starting at Binghamton University in New York here momentarily. And then you're going to be hearing from Haley Vantoorenburg, who you've heard from before, and Taylor Rand, who are going to be talking to you about the USF fossil collections, the troubles and triumphs that we have seen in them. So I won't give away more than that, but it'll be pretty exciting. So Ohav, if you're still speaking to me, come on up.
I'll make an exception.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi. Like Sarah said, I'm Ohav, and I'll be presenting my research that connects Paleozoic Echinoderm diversity dynamics to shifting climate patterns. I know it's a lot, but I promise it will make sense at the end. So just to make sure everyone is on the same page, I'd like to kind of do like a little overview of the Paleozoic, which, by the way, was a very significant time in Earth's history. A lot of climatic and biotic changes, or changes in life overall, are happening during this time. First, we have the Cambrian explosion, which should be pretty famous, I think. It's the introduction of a lot of large-scale taxonomic groups like phyla. So all of our really common fossil friends like trilobites and all those guys are showing up. To use an analogy that I really like, when you're writing a book, you'll often start out with your table of contents or some rough outline, kind of the same deal here. Then we have the Great Ordovician Biodiversification Event, or the GOBI. This is a radiation of smaller, lower-level taxonomic groups, like families, genera, and species. So to continue the analogy, you're filling in all of those chapter names you're outlined with actual story material. Then we have the late Ordovician mass extinction, or the loam, and this is currently understood to have taken part in 2 phases. First, a glaciation followed by a warming. So you did not like your first draft, so you just deleted like 85% of it. So why focus on echinoderms? Aside from the fact that they are super awesome, best fossil group ever. They are incredibly diverse, and they have a very wide distribution across space and time. So you can find a whole bunch of them all around the world, representing just about any time period you can think of. And this makes them really good for testing hypotheses that connect patterns of diversity to environmental conditions like climate or latitude. So currently, Paleozoic echinoderm diversity patterns are not very well understood because of a lack of focus on the entire clade. Right now, most of what we know comes from crinoids, which is just one class of a much larger phylum, like all of those echinoids and urchins that you guys are familiar with. So you can imagine how this could be a little bit of a problem. So to remedy this, our work focuses on expanding those understandings by calculating diversity, origination, and extinction rates, and testing hypotheses and how changes in climate can affect those rates. And to kind of illustrate the point, here is a figure from Stigall et al. 2019. All the way on the right, you see a diversity curve for the Ordovician. You'll note that is for crinoids, not all of the echinoderms. And you can see that right around the Gobi, the Great Ordovician Biodiversification Event, it's kind of a linear ramp up in genus diversity, which would suggest a very gradual change over time. And somewhat similarly, you'll see that 2-step loam kind of right here. It's a little hard to see, but kind of illustrating this may not be so dramatic a change at that time as well. So this takes us to our research focus. How does climate affect echinoderm diversity patterns during the Ordovician? And to do that, we're going to be looking at a lot of genera, 369 of echinoderm genera across the entire clade with a global distribution. We got this data from online databases and papers. Basically, we're just looking at where we can find them, all the formations, the countries, states, as well as the times that those fossils are associated with. And it has a very wide range of time, going from the early Cambrian to late Devonian, but just for our purposes tonight, we'll be hanging out in the Ordovician. So we did find some new patterns looking at the entire clade of echinoderms. And the most apparent differences are a 2-step Gobi and a 3-step loam. So over here, we can see 1-2-step increase in the Gobi, where previously it was that singular kind of ramp up increase. So this would suggest that this event took place in 2 events or 2 pulses, and then a 3-step Gobi, or sorry, 3-step loam, which would suggest that it takes place in 3 phases, not 2. So with these differences in mind, we wanted to find out what environmental factors might be driving them. And to do that, we decided to look toward isotope data, specifically oxygen 18. So if you're unfamiliar, isotopes are atoms of the same element, like oxygen and carbon, with different numbers of neutrons. And oxygen in particular has 2 stable isotopes. It has oxygen 16 and it has oxygen 18. So oxygen 18 has more neutrons, and that makes it heavier than oxygen 16. And because of that, oxygen 16, the lighter isotope, will freeze preferentially. It's a lot easier for it to freeze and evaporate. So this means that in cooler climates, there is more oxygen 18 in the water that can be used up by all sorts of marine organisms. And because all the oxygen 16 has been frozen up in the ice, kind of like how this diagram portrays here. So this makes oxygen 16 really, really handy for inferring climatic patterns in the rock record. So with all that in mind, we wanted to find a possible explanation for our diversity patterns. So we tried using those oxygen isotope data to see if there's a connection between the two. So we're trying to look at the patterns that we find in the isotope data and see if they can explain the patterns that we're observing in the biogeographic data. And we did find a strong connection between patterns of generic diversity, so genus diversity, and climate as inferred from oxygen 18. But interestingly, no such correlations between rates of extinction and origination. Kind of weird. So to make sure that our correlations aren't getting tangled up in the entire Ordovician, so nothing is overprinting the other, kind of like throwing one red sock in your load of white laundry. We decided to redo the analyses at specific time slices. So we decided to go with the early Ordovician, the Gobi, which is basically the middle Ordovician, and the loam, which captures like the very tail end of the late Ordovician. And overall, the patterns of biodiversity did not have a strong connection with changes in oxygen 18, which would suggest that oxygen 18 may not be the best way to explain the changes in biodiversity that echinoderms experience during the Ordovician. So, like I mentioned earlier, we did find a notable 3-step decrease in genus diversity during the loam. There it is, 1, 2, and 3. And this would suggest that the extinction event may have occurred in 3 stages, not 2. Interestingly, in recent studies that use smaller time intervals and various fossil groups across the world, the loam also appears to have occurred in 3 phases. So down here, we have the classic extinction phase from Sapkowski. So this uses an interval of 5 million years, and we can see the decline in diversity, 1, 2 phases. But above that, we have a very recent paper from Rasmussen et al., and this uses 2.3 million years, which is a little bit more than half, or less than half of the original. And already we can see 1, 2, 3 phases of decrease in diversity. And above that, uses an even finer time scale, 21 to 26,000 years. And even there, that pattern is preserved. 1, 2, 3 step decrease in genus diversity. The very top one is a regionally specific study to some paleocontinents that I'll show out later. And then the one in the middle uses a global database. So already we're seeing some pretty strong patterns. So our data that we use for our project is also global, with a heavy emphasis on Laurentia, which is modern day North America, Canada. So to put all that into perspective, a lot of our data comes from this area. As you can see, looks pretty much like what we have today. Florida does not quite yet exist. It is but a twinkle in Earth's eye. But we also have really great representation from Baltica, Siberia, Iberia, Awalonia, which is kind of like UK, Eastern Europe, and then Gondwana over here, which is like Western Europe, Russia. And this is also where a lot of that other regionally specific stuff comes from, Gondwana and also South China, which is right around here. So you can see that by looking at fossil groups of many different kinds from all over the world at a finer time interval, we're beginning to tease out a new way that this extinction event might have happened. So in conclusion, the analyses that we did with oxygen isotope data and Ordovician echinoderm biodiversity metrics revealed varying levels of correlation. The patterns didn't always explain each other very well. And this would suggest that something other than oxygen 18 explains biodiversity metrics of echinoderms during the Ordovician. It could be that different stable isotope data could explain it, like carbon 13, or maybe even heavy metals like mercury that you would get associated with volcanism. And our data, combined with the data from those other studies that I talked about, indicates a truly global 3-step loam, which is a pattern that is unique to how we currently understand the event. And that's it. Sorry, this kind of spoiled you, Elizabeth, but that's my talk. Thank you for listening. If you have
Any questions? I think you took us to school.
All right, if not, then I'll turn it over to Elizabeth, who is a way better master student than me, I promise.
Nice dress.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? All right, I'm Elizabeth. Nice to meet you. So I'm going to be presenting today on some work that both Ohav and I did for our class. I hope you like echinoderms because you're going to be hearing a lot more about them. We're going to be examining the latitudinal distribution of Ordovician echinoderm body plans. So we'll start here with just a little overview of the Ordovician period. This was between 485 and 443 million years ago. It has become great biotic change, including the Gobi, or the Great Ordovician Biodiversification Event, and the Loam, or the Late Ordovician Mass Extinction. Ohav already told you all about that. But for the purposes of this, all you have to remember is that the Gobi was characterized by rapid biodiversification in the Middle Ordovician of many organisms, including our Echinoderms. And the Loam was a multi-stage mass extinction event that included a warming period. Concurrent with these biotic changes were changes to the Earth state. So that's things like atmospheric oxygen and sea level. Generally, sea level was about 100 to 200 meters higher than it is today. And as we entered the Ordovician, the climate was generally quite warm, but it cooled down as time went on. So the next piece of the puzzle here is latitudinal diversity gradients, which will occasionally be referred to as the LDG because it's much shorter. And this is an ecological pattern that shows that diversity peaks around the equator and declines toward the poles. Now there are a couple of reasons for this. The first being that it's much more habitable climate at the equator and much more stable. Think about the difference between Florida and, say, New York. There's also just generally more space at the equator than there are at other parts of the planet. You can see this with the globe. And the equator also gets more sunlight year-round than anywhere else on the planet, making it really energy-rich zone. So because, like Ohav talked about, clade-wide biodiversity patterns of echinoderms are really poorly understood, we decided to see how this LDG pattern would apply to them, which led us to ask, how does the distribution of echinoderm body plans change with respect to the latitude during the Ordovician? And here's how we did that. We started with location and age data for 227 echinoderm genera. We split these occurrences into early, middle, and late time bins, and then defined latitudinal bins of about 30 degrees. Any further than that, any smaller than that, it really is hard to do when you get to the Ordovician. And then we sorted them by body plan, which we'll talk a little bit about in the next slide. As you can see, this is what our data looked like. It was very colorful. So when we talk about body plans, this is what we're saying. There are four main kinds. The first is mobile, which is free living, so it moves around and it has this really strong five-way symmetry. I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with sea stars and sea biscuits. That falls into this category. Then we have non-radial, which is also free living, but it really lacks that really strong symmetry we can see in sea stars. These guys are totally extinct. I can't compare them to anything that we might know today because they look a little wonky. And then we have pentaradial directly attached, which has this five-way symmetry again, but it attaches directly to substrate or to other organisms. And then last is pentaradial stem, which is also attached to a surface, but it's projected up into the water column of the stem. Those are crinoids or sea lilies, among other things. All right, so here are our results. What you're looking at here is the number of occurrences of each body plan. That's first sorted by time bin and then by latitudinal bin. This is how many genera of echinoderms we found in each period, and then color in each time slice, and then colored by body plan. So it looks like what we might expect to see from a latitudinal diversity gradient. In the center here, the really tall bars, so there's 30 degrees south, those are really equatorial, and it drops off really quickly as we get to the poles. That is primo. There are a couple of things that don't follow this pattern though. I want to draw your eye to here in the early Ordovician. You'll see these pink bars, they follow the opposite direction. That is unusual. We'll talk a little bit more about why later. And the last thing here is there's a huge scale difference on this slide. So if we look at the early Ordovician, we can see it maxes out at about 100. But if we look at the middle Ordovician and the late Ordovician, we get 800 different occurrences. This is because that is when the Gobi happened for the biodiversification event, huge influx region. All right, so let's talk about some missing data that we have. So you'll see that all of our data occurs in the southern hemisphere. Where's the occurrences in the northern hemisphere? Well, if you look at the map, you'll see that most of the land masses are in the southern hemisphere. The deep ocean that occurs in the northern hemisphere, it's It's not good for fossil preservation. We just don't find those. Why do we find echinoderms where we do? The latitudinal distribution of body plans could be attributed to environmental constraints. The Ordovician is characterized by inland seas where extensive carbonates accumulate on low latitude paleocontinents, like I'm told the east coast of Florida. Conversely, these are where the low inland seas are. Conversely, carbonates are almost entirely lacking at higher latitudes where sediment is instead predominantly siliclastic, very quartzy, much like the west coast of Florida. These hard carbonate substrates support echinoderm body plans that are attached, like that big green bar, pentaradial, because it gives them something really strong to hold on to. However, for the lower latitudes, where it's more siliclastic, it's much softer, much muddier. They don't have anything to hold on to, so they can't live there very long. Next is that interesting reverse pattern. These are the non-radial echinoderms. They're much more prevalent at higher latitudes, probably because they were adapted to this softer substrate living. Equally likely is the possibility that that the pentaradials attached kinds of echinoderms just couldn't live there, so the non-radials filled that niche. Last is the mobile glide plans. Likely, we're not seeing a lot of examples of them because they just weren't very diverse at that time. They didn't diversify until much later in the Mesozoic and Cenozoic. We just can't see much of a dramatic distribution. The distribution has also changed throughout the Ordovician, likely due to shifts in the Earth state. Changes in climate and sea level and sedimentation are likely key drivers in the distribution shifts. A notable example is that warming event that happened in the late Ordovician in the Loam, which caused the influx of carbonate sediments into higher latitudes. This allowed pentaradial echinoderms to proliferate in these previously inaccessible softer habitats and displace the soft substrate living communities that were there. All right, so to sum it all up for you, we found that the distribution of echinoderm body plans does change with latitude in the Ordovician, possibly due to differences in substrate across the world. Carbonates make up most of the substrate at these lower latitudes, while at higher latitudes, substrate was predominantly siliclastic. And these differences in substrate could explain differences in how body plans were distributed. And we want to repeat the study with expanded temporal ranges to capture shifts in diversity at the boundaries between periods, so like maybe going into the Silurian, see more about the Loam. And we also want to repeat the study at finer time intervals, so combined with a series of sea level changes to see how our patterns are affected by them. Thanks, you guys. Do you have any questions about echinoderms and their body plans? Okay, then I will introduce Haley Vantoorenburg and Taylor Rand, and you can come up and tell us about collections.
Before we start, I'm going to hand out a sample for you to look at. We will explain it during the presentation. This is an example of pyrite disease. Please do not open this bag. It would be very bad for all of us. It would make quite a mess, I think.
Can't catch it, Jim.
No. This used to be an ammonoid fossil, so I hope looking at it makes you as sad as it made me. Thank you.
Open the bell. So we're going to be talking about museum upkeep and data management here at USF Fossil Collections. So we began this project using the Methods of Paleobiology course. It was all of us, all the names listed here, we all contributed to kind of looking at the USF fossil and geology collections and kind of overhauling them all of this semester. So the state of the USF collections when we first went in was abysmal. They hadn't been really cared for in about 7 years. So we saw a lot of exposure to water and temperature fluctuations in the room that led to rampant pyrite disease, acid damage, and mold for a lot of the specimens. You can see examples of black mold. you can see, we had to take all of the cabinets out and kind of use up an entire classroom to try to remedy the issues. So first we're going to talk about pyrite disease. This was a big problem in the collections. Pyrite disease is also known as pyrite oxidation, pyrite rot, or pyrite decay. So first, fossils can be replaced by pyrite in a process called pyritization. This is really common in fossils like ammonites. They tend to be really susceptible to being replaced by pyrite. So pyrite disease itself is a chemical condition. It's a form of rusting. When pyrite oxidizes, in the presence of humid air, it takes the oxygen from the air and the water in the air, and it creates not only iron oxide rust, but it also creates iron sulfide, sulfuric acid, and sulfur dioxide gas. And these are not very enjoyable products that you would want from your fossil collection. And you can see the chemical reaction there. That's kind of how it works. This is an example of some of the pyrite disease in our collection. So sulfuric acid is very corrosive, and it can cause damage to specimens, specimen labels, and other storage items. Iron sulfate is a fluorescent mineral, so when the pyrite oxidation reaction takes place, iron sulfate is much larger than pyrite, and so when iron sulfate forms, it essentially causes the fossil to kind of expand to make room for it, and that can lead to fossils cracking, starting to break down, and the formation of acid can also increase the speed at which this reaction takes place. So this is where pyrite disease acts as a disease, where it can spread to other fossils in the collection nearby contaminated fossils. So you can see examples of ammonites. These are varying levels of pyrite disease. Ammonites very susceptible. Ferns kind of having the first show, it's beginning to crack from the disease. And contaminated rocks, that dust in there used to be an ammonoid fossil, not anymore. You see like the example that's getting passed around, it can get pretty bad. And then that's an example of a brachiopod that's beginning to rust. This means that it's very high risk for pyrite disease if you're going to let it continue in that condition, not separate it. So other things that we had to look out for in the collection were calcite disease. This is kind of similar to pyrite disease, but for specimens that are mostly formed of calcite. A lot of improper storage. You can see an example right here. This is kind of how a lot of the specimens looked. Mislabeled specimens. A lot of the specimens had been taken out for the teaching collections, or for teaching, and then not put back where they should be. Acid and water damage, and mold. Like black mold on a lot of the specimens and boxes, and wet specimens that had not been properly cared for and were beginning to kind of decay where they were.
So I'll be talking about the importance of PPE. As you can see from the sample that's being passed around, it's a very, very fine metal dust, and as we discussed before, all the byproducts of pyrite disease are hazardous. But PPE is not just important for us working in the museums, but also to protect the fossils themselves. Any cross-contamination of damaged specimens, any rough mishandling can cause further damage to any of these specimens. So it's very important to wear a mask and gloves when handling the fossils so that we don't inhale any pieces of rock dust and we don't cross-contaminate anything, including ourselves. So replacing the shelves. As we may see in this picture, all of the shelving originally in the collections were open wooden shelves. So any temperature or humidity fluctuations were directly affecting the fossils. There's no barrier between them and the environment. But also wooden shelves have porous, they're porous because it's made out of wood, so they can hold any humidity. At one point during the 7 years that these were not maintained, there was a leak in the ceiling. So not only are these specimens in direct contact with any water from the leak, but also the shelves themselves are holding that moisture, so it continually affects these fossils for weeks to months after. So now they're now being replaced with these metal shelving units, as you can see in the left photo. And in the center photo, you can see the many, many shelves that we've already started replacing and cataloging all the fossils from. So there's 30 shelves in that photo. We've cataloged at least 3 times that amount so far. So why are we changing all the cataloging systems? Museum methods are constantly changing. We're learning more materials to use or not use, such as types of glue to use to preserve specimens, new acid-free pens to write our labels with. But also, with the digital age, we're now realizing how important it is to have multiple catalog systems. So not only our digital Excel files, but also our physical labels. So in the case of any files being corrupted, we have the physical material. In the case of leaks and water damage, we still have something to fall back on. So you can see the classroom overtaken with specimens as we work on reorganizing them for our new shelves and our new system. So not only do methods change in museum cataloging, but also the information itself can change. Taxonomy is constantly being updated as new methods for analyzing phylogenetic trees appear, as we get new data and new specimens and new research. We're also changing formation data as we learn more about the age as we test more formations. We also need to check all the label data. There's human error involved as well, misspelling specimen names, misplacing labels. So as we add them to the new Excel file, we want to update anything that we can. We're also adding GUID numbers, which are global identifiers, so that they can be accessed by researchers around the world. We're also still separating collections. We have research quality specimens, which have location data, age data, identification. We have teaching collections, which may miss some of that data, but still be useful examples. And we also have collections sorted by who collected them, or by location, such as Maison Creek, which is known for its plant fossils. We also did some lovely collection with you, so thank you so much for your help. We went to the Brooksville and Center Hill quarries to collect some Echinoderm fossils. As you may have noticed from the previous slides, a lot of our specimens were damaged and had to be removed for safety reasons. And so constantly expanding these collections with better materials, even as we have to remove some for upkeep, is very important. Here we see some of the new specimens that we got on those field trips with the Tampa Bay Fossil Club, such as the imprint of a bivalve, some great foraminifera specimens, some bivalve steinkerns, which are internal molds and also the shells themselves, and some beautiful echinoids. So thank you all for your help with that. We're hoping to continue working with the collections and improving them as we can.
Who's the curator? Is there a curator for your collection?
There was a curator. It was originally Brian Andrews, I believe. And he reorganized the specimens in 2016 and created a digital database. But a lot of the labels were misplaced or lost or misspelled. It was, I believe, a team of students working on it. So the lack of upkeep was the big issue with these specimens. Yes.
So if specimen starts to pyritize, is there a way to stop that and reverse it, or save the specimen, or is it once it's, I mean, obviously that thing you passed around is gone, but.
Yeah, that is a great question. The big issue here is that the conditions that encourage pyrite disease are the exact conditions of Florida, high humidity, high temperature. There is no way to reverse it. There are ways to prevent it. So even if you have pyritized specimens, such as ammonoids, a lot of those can go decades with no effects. But a lot of museums have things like humidity controls or even desiccant packets, like what you find in packaging to remove humidity. They also have that for oxygen levels to prevent oxidation and rusting. But pyrite disease can start within 3 days of exposure to humid conditions, and it can accelerate to the example you've seen within a week. So important thing is controlling this as much as we can.
Can you coat them with anything, or?
So the issue there, as Taylor talked with the efflorescent minerals, they expand, and so it causes a big build of pressure. So you can coat a fossil, but if you trap any moisture with it, and it can still pyritize within that, you risk explosion instead. So that's a big issue at pyrite mines. They uncover pockets and they cause explosions. Yes?
I admire you for
taking, action on this, it just seems like a long time coming. You know, it seemed like it completely got out of hand for a long time.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to have the opportunity to work on this and have, the ability to replace these cabinets, but I'm sure as all of you know, with your passion for fossils, that.
And this
you see
probably
some-
isn't the only university that's having these issues.
Yeah, I know University of Michigan is currently doing research on methods to prevent the spread of pyrite disease. It's a big issue in a lot of museum collections, especially since a lot of fossils, like vertebrate fossils, have to be kept at a higher humidity level than can prevent pyrite disease.
What buildings is this stored in?
This is currently in the chemistry building.
Okay. And how far back, I used to work here back in the early 1980s, and I remember visiting this site. And, did any of the, stuff, what's the oldest marked as far as who donated it and what year? I mean, we traded back in the 1970s, 80s, we traded with other universities all around the world. And we gave them certain things, they gave us certain things. That was always fascinating to me. Where the stuff, what's the oldest label you found in some of your stuff? How far back, what university, you have any idea of that?
I do not know off the top of my head. From what I've seen 1980s, but I'm sure someone else that worked up there might know.
Most of that information's been lost because the catalogs that I received had none of that information,
Wow.
and most of the fossil specimens were separated.
Well, midnight shift, that's what I did. I
Yeah.
did different things, I, what?
These students have been, working with, a lot of missing information.
There's a couple of, fully labeled ones from 1971. I can't remember who exactly it was, but they put all the information
I
down.
know our mineral collections have some better cataloging, and I've seen 1940s there.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yes.
How does the misidentification and mislabeling first notice? It's such a massive collection. How do you even think, oh, some of these might be mislabeled? Where did you start with something like that?
Thankfully, we now are in the internet age.
Yeah.
We can cross compare.
So you can
But,
identify.
yeah, the big indicator was opening drawers and seeing drawers and drawers of specimens with no labels at all.
Oh.
And then opening another drawer and seeing a stack of labels separated
Oh,
from
gosh,
everything.
yeah.
So we know it belonged at one point to something that's now gone.
There were some fun mislabels. Like, what was your favorite?
My favorite mislabeling, I think, was a brachiopod that was labeled shrimp.
A lot of really fun ones.
I'm assuming the black mold ruined a lot of the stuff where, scientifically, you don't wanna bleach these fossils, there's not a lot of way to kill black mold and of course objects, so you still have to dispose of the stuff that was covered with black mold or
Yeah,
something.
Yeah. It's like the pyrite disease, even if you can't see it on the specimen itself, that doesn't mean it's not there necessarily.
mold.
Yeah.
Right.
So we had to get rid of a large amount of those specimens.
So do you have enough information to know, like, oh, we had to throw this way, now they're like a new wish list, we need to find a replacement? Or is that not in that stage yet?
We're getting there.
Okay,
We're working on it.
yeah.
Yeah, we had a large portion of the brachiopods that had to be removed, but thankfully the brachiopods were a large section of our collection to begin with. Yes.
A lot of people come to me for advice on prepping mechanisms we find locally here. And I hear so many people say, oh, take it home and soak them in vinegar. And I always tell people, don't do that. Because I know people that we're talking about calcite disease. They're little sponges. And they suck that vinegar up. And people say, oh, no, I've done it. They're fine. Well, 5 years from now, they might not. Because it gets to the interior of the saline because it's a humid environment. And the next thing you know, you got crumble dust in the floor and more negative. So that's why I normally tell people, if you have to, put it in baking soda. Try to counteract it, but you get something in the inside of the sponge, it's hard to get that out.
Yes.
I also wanted to say thank you to Geology, who has been digitizing them on another database as well. So if y'all haven't been familiar with My Fossil, it's a way for researchers and avocational paleontologists alike to upload their finds so that researchers all over the world can find
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
A couple weeks ago, my friend Lee and I went down to the Peace River, and on the way we saw some torn up area alongside the road. And the area that was outside fences, we found there was a bank of dirt that was as tall as I was, and about a foot or so below the top of it, there was a layer of rock, and it was all dirt. And all over the place there were shells, and we're not 100% sure here, not sure, I'm gonna try getting more information, but there may be plant impressions in the top of this rock, and I gotta figure that out. Same trip, when we got to the Peace River, my friend was standing 5 feet away from me, and she found a partial baby gum with their tooth. Yeah, I didn't find anything in the river. She found it. Really cool teeth though. And that was it.
Thank you. You set it down. Thank you very much. Let's do Connor Barnes.
All right, so I found a couple things, not a couple weeks, it's been since November, so it's been a while. But I went diving in North Florida and found a couple different cool things. I found this camel vertebrae, it's pretty cool. Tapir toe bone, let's see. Got a mastodon lower tusk, which was pretty cool. It's not, complete, but pretty interesting. Then the next thing, I want to get this out of the thing. It'll take me a second, sorry. There's a lot of pins in this. Alright, so found a camel tooth that's kind of, eat up from erosion, but it's still pretty cool. Then I have a cooked fossilized deer jaw, which is pretty nice. I was pretty happy about. And then the biggest thing that I found that I'm super happy with, kind of weird but interesting, was a manatee rib, which is pretty neat. So I'm gonna leave this all up here if you guys want to take a look at it after that. But yeah, that's all I have. So.
Thank you. You don't see a lot of those. Eileen, you want to come up?
Yep. All right, besides the other two partial neck teeth I showed you from the fossil farm, this weekend I was in North Florida as well, ironically enough, at a friend's house, and I noticed on his driveway, it looked like, the typical kind of dirt that you would get from some of the mines. And so I found some echinoids just on his driveway. So I found these yesterday. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then I think it was last month, I went down to Venice and did a Venice dive, and I got my personal best neck tooth. So not as good as mine, so you're gonna see soon, but this is about 4.75 inches, so that's my personal best. And I like it because it's like a different color than what you usually find out there. It's kind of brown, so I thought it was pretty cool. Just wanted to share. Thank you.
And if you check out her YouTube, she's got some really cool videos of finding that tooth.
Yep.
Mr. Appledorn.
Since the last meeting, I got my dire wolf tooth. It's a P4. I have my bison tooth, pretty thick, all the way down to the root. And I got all these almost perfect megs out of the river on our digs. Even the small ones. So that's it.
Awesome.
Can I swap these out for yours?
No, I think I'll keep mine.
Okay. It is Christmas,
Did anybody find any more teeth on your trips? Any more teeth on your, no more shark teeth coming out of there?
No.
You can hold that and talk. Yep, you can hold that, talk into that.
So,
me and my family found a giant land tortoise shell piece. We found it at the Echinoderm River.
Thank you.
Leave it up there on the table.
He said, I don't want to, as he started. Were you snorkeling or scuba diving or just
Well,
Tubing.
tubing.
tubing? Which side of the bridge were you on? You're good. Thank you. Dr. Bob.
Mike saw a bunch of other stuff. I moved down in the pecking order after he saw some of the stuff that's up here, so.
I'm mixing it up.
Anyway, so I have, for those of you that don't know, I have some property up right on the Steenhatchee River. It's a very dark river, relatively shallow, except off of my dock, it's 22 feet. Anywhere else you dive, it's like 4 or 6 feet. Anyway, I've been having some good luck up there. I did find this mastodon tooth, which is a pretty decent one. And this is a little baby mastodon tooth. Really killer. It's got some really nice color. And it was dark, and I found this blob under there. And I noticed it had some ridges, and it's a complete hole. It's going to be hard if someone wants to come up and look at it later. It's a baby mammoth tooth, spit tooth, and they have, I think I've told people before about this, they have glands, all elephants, mammoths, mastodons, today's elephants, glands in the front of their jaw. As the teeth move forward, they digest the roots off and they spit them out. Next tooth comes in a little bigger, next tooth comes in a little bigger, and I did find a half of a big, well, it'll be about that big of a big adult male one, but I didn't bring it, it's just half, it's busted. So, disappointing.
Spoiled?
Yeah, but
Oh, it's just half of me.
in that area, stuff does not move, so there's a good chance of finding the rest. I've done that multiple times in there. I found one came up in 3, that has all the roots, came up in 3 pieces. So there's a chance in that hole that I will find it, and it's secluded enough that more than likely no one else will figure out where I'm going.
Thank you.
Google Earth, maybe, I don't know.
When it tells you the location, it tells you how scary it is to go there.
It is. I'm scared. I live there.
Rob Carlton.
So usually I'm living on the river by this time continuously, but unfortunately, along with the gray hair comes other horrible problems, and I've had hip issues and have avoided being on the river because I dig with my feet for the most part. And after MRIs, x-rays, I had no answers, so I said, the heck with it, I'm going back on the river. So I was out on Thanksgiving with a friend of mine, and I believe this is a sloth canine. I've gotten sloth canines before, but they've always been considerably larger.
It would be a panini form, is what they're called. But yeah.
Okay. It's
I'll take a look at it. I'll tell you.
And this one's just, they're more common in North Florida. I don't ever hardly ever get them here. South of Arcadia, it's a little 3-toed horse. Because for the most part, back when these guys were running around, everything down there was underwater. But there's a spot on the river that I've been collecting for years and years, and I got a mammoth tooth out there about 5 years ago. And 2 years ago, we got a mastodon tooth out there in one bend where there's just a Jenga puzzle of trees, palm logs. So we went, I told my friend John, I said, this bend in the river is mine. I said, because there's good stuff here. So I started fanning and digging and got quite a lot of small stuff, and then started kicking something bigger. And one of those things where I had to do a little repair on it. It came out in 3 pieces and was missing part of the end. I went back a week later and found the last little piece that was missing. And bucket list fossil for me, because you just don't get them.
I'd do anything for that.
It's a complete tusk.
Beautiful.
I think it's mastodon.
Put your mouth on the end and say, we.
Yeah, but it's really, it's very, very well mineralized. I was very blessed, because I have found them out there, and I know other people that have found them, they just blow up on them. And I brought it home and soaked it in a combination of wood glue and water twice, and then let it completely dry, and then Vinac the crap out of it. So I'm hoping, you know, it's been a few weeks now. I keep looking, and it's like there's still cracks on it, so every time a little crack shows up, I put a little bit more glue into it. But, yeah. It was nice to find when you can actually pick up and manage too, because the 12-footers, it's like, okay, that's what you're gonna do. At least this one, hopefully I can put it under the TV or something.
Under the TV.
I didn't see what was in the box, he should've went last.
Yeah, yeah.
Sounds like.
You know, a lot of people think you have to go scuba diving or have a secret spot, and Rob's secret is he just goes, and he's not going in a boat.
Well, you learn the river. You know, there's certain spots where there's certain things come out. I mean, the entire river doesn't produce fossils. I mean, you know, the bottom, the geology is up and down. There's certain areas where there were sinkholes, certain areas where there's clay, where there's vert stuff. There's certain areas where megs come out. And, you know, you just, when you do it for 20 years, you just, oh, I know this is my meggy spot, or this is an elephanty spot, or, you know, it's just a matter of, it's like old friends. You go out there and.
You go out with walking with a shovel and a screen, right?
Yeah.
That's the first.
And the bad hip.
That's the first. Bob, I was considering you for the cover next month, but sorry. Do you want to go, Mike? Mike kidding.
You should have had him last.
No, you get some moves and Oz too. Microphone's right there. That's a big tooth.
Yeah, I did a lot of diving at Venice the last few months, and I brought in some of the megalodons, the better ones that I found anyway. And here's one case of megalodons, and these pretty much came out like this. They weren't dirty at all. I went in early September. Most of these came from shortly after Hurricane Idalia went by, and it really stirred the bottom up quite a bit. And I was diving at visibility anywhere from 6 inches up to maybe 3 to 4 feet. The viz was pretty bad. Later in the month it got better, but the best stuff is, as soon as you can get out there, whatever low vis you can dive in, you're gonna find the best stuff. Because a lot of stuff gets turned up on the storm. But here's one case of megs. I found all these in 1 week. I found a few other ones here. Here's another one here that's a little over 5 inches here. This is a combination of beach diving and boat diving, but anywhere from, let's say, 18 feet deep to about 25 feet deep. And then I also found my personal best or largest megalodon I ever found. I thought I had a shot at 6 inches, but this is 5.85, nearly perfect. I mean, it's got serrations all the way around. The backside is really nice also, but this is my personal best. I've been hunting teeth off and on for over 50 years. So when you get your personal best, you get really excited about that. I found a lot of other nice fossils, loads of small teeth, half of a mammoth tooth, and also a pretty rare thing I found part of a gomphothere tusk. The lower tusk, it's actually about this big around, maybe 1.5 inches, and the piece I got's about 6 inches long. And one thing very unusual about this, one of my dive buddies, 2 days later, found an adjoining piece that connects to mine. So between the two of us, neither one of us is ready to give up our piece of the tusk here. But it's about 12 inches long. You just have a 6-inch piece of the tusk. And they fit perfectly. And so he must have found it right in the same spot. I dove in that same area 3 days in a row, but I didn't ever find it. But he got the other piece, and there's probably one more piece.
Who had the longest?
They were the same. They're both, but he got the tip end. It's got the tip. And one thing on the gomphothere tusk, which I didn't know, but actually there's one part of it, 3/4 of the way around it, all just like a regular bone. But there's one shiny piece, like a shiny enamel piece, along one edge, which was really hard because you see a lot of bones where we dive. But usually pick them up, look at them, and it was shiny on one edge. And then I looked online and actually saw other gomphothere tusks that were the same way.
They're all like that.
They're
Some
okay.
others have that strip.
Yeah, there's a strip about this long, I mean, going the whole length of the tusk, but it only covers maybe maybe 25% around the tusk. It's just a shiny, like enamel type piece, which is very unusual. So it looks just like a bone on the top. You pick it up and you turn it over and around, it had a slick, shiny piece on there. So at some point, either my friend or I, neither one of us was ready to give up our piece of the tusk. But
Traded that 6-inch?
I offered him like a 4-inch meg or a mammoth tooth, but he wouldn't take it.
Up the ante.
Whose boat was it?
What?
Whose boat?
Oh, we were off the beach.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
dive site's being given today.
yeah. So, anyway.
So, did I miss? Come on up, Katora and Lawrence.
So as usual, this is more giant birds for you. And I want some proper audience interaction this time. This is for everyone, not just the kids out there. Like the Christmas song says, it's for everyone from 1 to 92. Starting off at number 5. Who can tell me what the largest living bird in the world today is?
Ostrich.
Come on, everyone, louder.
Ostrich.
That's right. And where do ostriches live?
Africa.
Yeah, Africa. Yes, ostriches live in Africa. But what if I were to tell you that at one time the ostrich's range extended much further, up out of Africa, throughout Asia to as far east as China? This one is the Arabian ostrich, and it lived in the Arabian Peninsula, of course, bordering the countries of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Jordan, and Syria, as well as in the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, and Oman, associating with herds of Arabian oryxes, Syrian onagers, and Saudi gazelles. Native people hunted this bird for its meat, eggs, and feathers using bows and arrows, chasing them down on horseback. And can you imagine just how many omelets you can make with an ostrich egg? The largest egg in the world. And of course, feathers were also popular in ladies' fashion. Though ostriches can't fly, they can run at speeds of up to 40 miles per hour, which makes them very difficult to catch. And if you do happen to catch up to one and corner it, it will not hesitate to kick your butt into next week. Its kick is powerful enough to kill a lion, so imagine what it could do to a person. The introduction of guns made killing these birds easier, and automobiles were able to outpace ostriches in speed. By the early 20th century, this bird became rare, with one being seen at the borders of Jordan and Iraq in 1928, and another being shot and eaten by workers on a pipeline in 1941. The last known specimen of an Arabian ostrich was seen in February of 1966, when one was washed down by floodwaters near Jordan. So it's a bird that you can see today, but one of them is gone. Now, coming into number 4, try and guess this one. In the Christmas song, The 12 Days of Christmas, there was 7 of what swimming?
Swans.
Yes, swans. They've been gracing our planet with their elegance since the late Miocene epoch.
And their food.
Yeah, that's true. But on the islands of Malta and the Sicily in the Mediterranean, during the middle of the Pleistocene epoch, lived Cygnus falconeri, the giant swan. It measured up to 4 feet tall with a wingspan exceeding 9 feet. And just imagine, this bird stood taller than the dwarf elephants that shared its island home. Imagine a bird taller than an elephant. Yeah. And like with ostriches, they're a bird that you do not want to get on the bad side of. Because of its size, it was probably a poor flyer or completely flightless. Unlike many other Ice Age megafauna, it died out before the arrival of humans to its region, around 500,000 to 200,000 years ago, which means climate change induced sea level changes and introduced animals caused its demise, along with other unusual creatures that lived with it, like the dwarf elephants, another type of swan that was a dwarf in and of itself, some giant owls, giant cranes, large lizards, giant tortoises, and even giant dormice. Like I like to say, islands do weird stuff to animals, and even weirder stuff to people. Now, moving on to another island. At number 3, New Zealand is home to many unique birds. Among them, the kakapo, a large flightless parrot roughly the size of a rabbit. But during the Miocene epoch, around 19 million years ago, lived an even bigger relative, known as Heracles inexpectatus, or by the nickname of Squawkzilla. This large parrot was described from a pair of incomplete fossil leg bones discovered in 2008 at St. Bathans in Otago, New Zealand. It grew up to 2 feet 11 inches tall and probably weighed 15 pounds, making this the largest parrot that ever lived. The kakapo itself was also close to becoming extinct. It's still critically endangered with a population of 247 individuals as of this year. But thankfully, conservation has helped to save it from further destruction. And since you can't find them in zoos, the only place that you can see a living kakapo is in New Zealand. So book a flight. Now at number 2, an animal that you might also recognize today, that probably best represents the cold winter season. Giant penguins. The first penguins appeared on Earth around 62 million years ago, not long after the extinction of the dinosaurs. And it's likely if non-avian dinosaurs hadn't gone extinct, they would have evolved anyway. But even early in their history, some got huge. Echinoderm, the one illustrated here, stood up to 5 feet tall and lived 36 million years ago in Eocene South America, where it was warm and tropical, ironically. 2 other genera, both found in Antarctica, lived through the late Eocene and early Oligocene epochs. Anthropornis reached 5 feet 11 inches in height, the same as an average person. Whereas Paleozoic, the tallest species, grew up to 6 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 256 pounds. The largest in terms of mass was Kumamanu, literally meaning monster bird of Paleocene New Zealand, 55 million years ago. It was 5 feet 7 inches tall and may have weighed as much as 350 pounds, the same as an adult gorilla. So you can imagine, drop my faithful tape measure here. King penguin stands around this height. But imagine a penguin standing around this height. Yeah, imagine seeing those at SeaWorld. The giant penguins likely became extinct due to competition from marine mammals such as seals and whales. Today there are about 17 species of penguin alive and all live in the southern hemisphere. And only one prefers tropical waters, and that's the Galapagos penguin. Doesn't get as big as this, but it's still cute. And even though we call these birds penguins, they weren't the first birds to be called that. Coming in at number 1, the auk family includes puffins, murres, guillemots, and auklets. These seabirds are remarkably similar to penguins in appearance, The difference is that nearly all of them could fly. During the Miocene and Pliocene epochs, flightless auks lived on both the Atlantic and Pacific coasts of North America and parts of Europe. In more recent centuries, in the cold waters of the North Atlantic, along the coasts of Britain, Ireland, Canada, Norway, Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands, lived the great auk, one of the largest alcids to exist. The great auk of the genus Penguinus was the original penguin, known to sailors long before true penguins, which were named after it, were discovered by man. Like them, the great auk had black and white plumage, was flightless and awkward on land, and was a powerful swimmer. The word penguin comes from the Welsh words meaning white head, referring to the markings on the auk's head, which were round patches in summer and white bands in winter. It was also known as gerfell, from Icelandic word gerfugl. It spent its entire life out at sea catching fish, only coming ashore to rocky islands to breed and raise its young in large colonies. These birds paired for life and together raised a single chick. Native Americans hunted these birds for food, of course, but also saw them as an important cultural symbol, with many people buried with the bones of these birds. One burial site had a body covered with more than 200 beaks of this auk. Early Europeans hunted the auk both as a source of meat and for use as fishing bait. Eggs were also eaten. Likewise, the birds were hunted for their oil used to light lamps and fuel stoves, and for their downy feathers, which were in high demand. And like what people did with seals back then, they would do it by clubbing the poor birds over the side of their heads, and then taking them aboard their ships and boiling them down for their fat. By the middle of the 16th century, scientists soon realized that the great auk was becoming rarer. And in a cruel twist of irony, natural history curators and private collectors began hunting these birds to collect as many skins and eggs as possible. The last great auk in Britain was caught and killed by 3 men from St. Kilda in July of 1840. The bird in question was kept alive for 3 days until a fierce storm blew in, and the men, thinking that the bird was a witch who had summoned the storm, clubbed the animal to death. The last great auk colony lived on a volcanic island off of Iceland until 1830, when it was submerged following an eruption, forcing the birds to relocate to the nearby island of Elde, which was to be their final refuge. On June 3rd, 1844, the last pair of great auks were killed while incubating their egg, which was crushed. The last appearance of a great auk was on the Grand Banks of Newfoundland in 1852. And ironically, there have been fossils of great auks found here in Florida, which suggests like some birds, they probably got lost and became vagrants. But it just goes to show you just how much damage some people can do, even in the name of science. That doesn't give you the right to kill off every animal you see. I would have liked to see great auks and giant penguins, and even an Arabian ostrich. What kind of giant birds would you have liked to see in life? Thank you.